Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, because it's another strong biblical example of prophecy and fulfillment. And this one's also pretty cool because it's going to influence our understanding of the book of Daniel. I'll explain the connection between Daniel and today's passage. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, okay, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Messiah would be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they told him, because this is what is written by the prophet. And now here we go. Here's a quote of Micah 5:2 in Matthew chapter 2. "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him." After hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Okay, here's the connection between this event and what we're studying in Daniel. The Persian Magi were, think like a fusion between like scientists and priests. They served a really prominent role in ancient Persia because they were the kingmakers. And at about this time, in fact, a couple of years after this, they would even install a new king in Persia. They were scientists that did so with sort of a pseudo-spiritual flair. And they got some things right, all right? I mean, like they could predict the dates of eclipses quite perfectly. I mean, so could the Aztecs, but they didn't know that at the time. That's actually why, for example, not, to move west geographically and give you just sort of a well-known archaeological example of this, there's Stonehenge, which is designed in such a way to be able to accurately predict eclipses, except it's wrong every 300 years. And then, we can study the area around it and we can see that like that used to be home base for everybody. And then it was wrong. And then it was like abandoned after 300 years. And so kind of reading between the lines, we can see something similar happening over here in Persia. The Magi were scientists who would get stuff right from time to time. In fact, the the Babylonians rather, are why we measure 60 seconds to a minute and 60 minutes to an hour. Okay, their Persian conquerors had some similar moments, but they didn't pretend to be atheistic about it. Today, we're seeing something similar to the Persian Magi sort of taking over public thought, and it is something that feigns atheism, but it's not behaving atheistically. It's scientism, where, man, like if you ever dare questioned the Magi, your tail went into the lion's den, okay, or your butt went into the fiery furnace. And today, while there are no fiery furnaces, no lion's dens, man, like God help you if you question something that's solidified as fact and seems to be proven evidentially. Like that was the same kind of mindset. Scientism is one that feigns atheism, but functions more like a religion. Like God help you if you question our teachings. That was kind of the mindset of the Magi. We ought to be more humble within science. We ought to be purely objective with science, but instead we will silence dissent and shame and ostracize people who question it. Right, rather than inviting them in to see what the data show, and then also to recant when the data proves us wrong. Right, like we've kind of brushed under the rug the fact that we were totally wrong about frankly, the universe, according to the James Webb Space Telescope. And we were totally wrong when it comes to like nutrition. That's probably one of the most clearly shifting sands in my lifetime. And instead, we're kind of using it into a pseudo-religious fervor, especially when it comes to climate change. The mantra here seems to be like, we're saving the earth, we're saving the earth, we're saving the earth. And like, I don't think we're actually really doing jack to save the earth. I get it. The climate changes. I mean, I see that, but I don't think that my paper straws are going to have any effect on the orcas, right? The Magi had similar power, but he was even more fearsome over ancient Persia. And they weren't so much, they weren't so much like astrologers as they were dream interpreters. That goes back to the book of Daniel. Daniel rises to power and is sort of put in charge of the Magi, even though he's a Jew. Many of the Magi hate him for this, and that's why they're gunning for him. It's why they capitalize on his absence to have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whose real names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, thrown into the fiery furnace. That's why they're gunning for Daniel. That's why they're even legislating the way they are. They're legislating things that they don't even really believe in themselves, so that like they can just get rid of this Daniel guy. But Daniel is better at them than they are at their own craft. Look at how God leads them home. They're warned in a dream. See, these are the Magi. These are Persian mystics, and they are king makers. They are representing Persia, who is, a massive world power, but they've also been taken over by Parthia. And so the Parthians are like a rival to Rome. And when these like Magi show up, they likely do so with great fanfare. It's not like we picture like three dudes on camels, but look at this. It says that like everyone is freaked out by their arrival. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Okay, like why is all of Jerusalem disturbed by three dudes on camels? It's not three dudes on camels. These are the Magi. They represent Parthia, and they are the king makers. In Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuchadnezzar just kind of did whatever they wanted. They could go back on their word and they could change their minds. But Cyrus was beholden to even things that had his signature on them. And whatever this, think of it like a corrupt board that he had to function through. Whatever these Magi dictated, that was law. That's why even when, the king regrets throwing Daniel into the lion's den, he can't do anything about it. And that's why when we study the book of Esther and we see that Xerxes, Ahasuerus, has this murderous decree issued, he feels like he can't go back on it. All he can do is issue some other edict that gives the Jews the right to defend themselves. That's the way things worked. The Magi were the guys with the real power. And here come these Parthian mystics descended from the Persian Magi intellectually, and now they're in Jerusalem. And Herod is paranoid because it's written in the Talmud. I don't know if it's accurate or not, that he was Edomian, meaning he was an Edomite. He was descended from Esau. And someone descended from Esau, if that's true, has no right to rule over to the descendants of Jacob. And so he is really paranoid. He's been granted his power as the king over the Jews from Rome, but Rome's a long way off. Add to this his deep insecurity by the fact that he may have been an Edomite. And then further compound this with the arrival of these Parthian mystic kingmakers. That's why the old Christmas carol kind of gets it wrong. We three kings of Orient are. They weren't kings themselves, but they could write up a law, put the king's signature on it, and they might as well have been kings. They were king makers. And in fact, 2 years after these events, they would in fact install a new king. And so this is why Herod freaks out. Okay, they're making a move. We're a long way from Rome. I'm insecure. I don't have the right to rule over these people. And now these dream reading mystic scientist types have all shown up. And so he asks them, his chief priests and scribes, to consult and tell him where the Messiah would be born. And they read Micah 5:2. It's cool because Micah 5:2 is specific. And it's it's not the only Bethlehem in the ancient world. There were a couple of Bethlehems. This is the one that's in Judah, and it's specific. It's a prophecy that's really ancient by the time they read it, but it's very specific. It even specifies which Bethlehem, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And so that's why Herod is freaking out. Now, I believe, by the way, I've consulted this before. Johannes Kepler kind of gave rise to this practice of showing replications of the movements of the stars in the sky from a perspective on Earth. There was a piece called Bethlehem Star. I forget the name of the lawyer who made it, but he kind of used modern day software that shows the movement of the stars in the sky, and kind of recapitulated what Johannes Kepler put out. What was that, in the 1600s? That this star of Bethlehem was like an alignment of multiple stars. My personal take is that it's supernatural. It's a supernatural phenomenon that God uses to show them the way. Now, Herod is an absolute snake. He's feigning Christianity. He's claiming that he wants to go worship Jesus. He doesn't. In fact, he's going to order the slaughter of a bunch of little boys in Bethlehem because he feels so threatened by this. But then these Parthian wise men end up worshiping Jesus. We don't know how many of them there are. We know the number of gifts they brought. Gold, right, because he's king. Frankincense, right, speaks more to his royalty. And then myrrh as well. These can also be used as burial spices. It's sort of macabre when you think about it, but it's because they're acknowledging like their intellectual ancestor, Daniel. Okay, rewind before Parthia, before Persia. Back in Babylon was Daniel. Daniel rose to prominence in both Babylon and its successor, Persia. And he planted these seeds of prophecy that lead his successors hundreds of years later to investigate the claims. And they arrive at first at Herod's because they didn't expect him to be born in a manger in Bethlehem. They go straight to Jerusalem. Really, they're 6 miles off, 6 miles south in Bethlehem, right under Herod's nose. That's where he's actually born. And so once they get there, they see. Once they follow the signs, they arrive, they see Jesus. That's when they fall to their knees. That's when they worship Jesus. That's when they give him these gifts that are prophetically significant. And that's when they are warned by God in a dream. And this is totally on brand for Parthian magi, warned in a dream. We've also studied in prophecy too how like Jesus is given these gifts. He's given gold, frankincense, and myrrh as he's newborn, right, or perhaps 3 years old. But what's missing in these gifts later on is the myrrh, because in end times prophecy, he's already died and resurrected. He doesn't need the myrrh. All right, he's given the gold and the frankincense, all right, to speak to his royalty because he's King Jesus. So everybody knows this story, right? Not everybody knows the historic background to it. When we get to the book of Daniel, you'll see how clear this is. But I wanted to include this in this series to give you a foretaste of what we're going to see in Daniel, but also to give you yet another example of prophecy and fulfillment. That these guys consulted, these chief priests of Herod consulted at the behest upon the arrival of these wise men with Micah 5:2 and saw that it was specific to Jesus. That can't be made up because once again, we know that the book of Micah is much older than the Gospel of Matthew. So here's yet another example, what you've got sitting there in your pocket of prophecy and fulfillment, speaking to the veracity of Scripture alone. So let the Bible make the case for itself as you evangelize the lost.